Hello, I'm Phil Moran. I'm a physicist, a filmmaker, and an atheist. Where is heaven? I mean, the two words in that we need to look at are where and also heaven. First of all, we've got to say, what is heaven? Before we can really ask the question, where is heaven? And I think traditionally the idea of heaven is a place where people go when they die to be close to God, and heaven is perfect, and so on and so on and so on. When I was a child, actually, I always thought of heaven was like a fun fair, something like that. And if we accept that that's what heaven is like, it's like a perfect, beautiful, lovely place where you go after you die, then you are kind of thinking of a location. So a location in space or maybe time. Now, talking about space, generally speaking, wherever we've looked, we don't find really any sign of heaven. Many thousands of years ago, maybe people thought about heaven being up there, up in the skies. And of course, we can look up in the skies now with telescopes, and we can look far into space with radio telescopes, and we have the Hubble Space Telescope looking at other galaxies and stars. And, you know, that's all we see, galaxies and stars. So it kind of seems unlikely that there's a place out there that people can go to, you know, after they die. And apart from anything else, how would they get there? Unless it's really close, like the other side of Mars or the other side of the moon. Well, no, unlikely. Where is heaven? Heaven's nowhere. I don't think there is a heaven. I think we're frightened of death. Humans are quite intelligent compared to... We're unusual in that we are intelligent and have large brains compared to other animals on the earth. And we know about our death. We know we're going to die. And that's a scary concept. And the other aspect about human beings is that they like stories, and they like to explain things, and we like to explain the origins of things, and we are inquisitive. And when we can't find answers, I think sometimes we make up answers. You know, God is an example of that, I would say. Heaven is probably another example of that. We're scared of death, so we invent a place we go when we die so that we can believe we're not going to die. Okay, the idea of star stuff. Human beings are star stuff in that if you look at the makeup of the chemical makeup of human beings, we have all sorts of elements inside us. And you've got to ask the question, where do those elements come from? Now, if you look at what we scientists currently understand to be the history of the universe, there was the Big Bang, and after the Big Bang, galaxies and planets formed. And, certainly early on it was stars and galaxies formed. And the makeup of the universe was primarily hydrogen and helium, maybe a bit of lithium, so very light elements. None of the stuff that you see in human beings now. So you could ask the question, well, where do the heavy stuff come from? The elements like carbon and oxygen and so on. And the theory is that in the early universe, the stars formed, and then as some stars were using up the material inside them, because what stars do is they basically burn hydrogen and helium to create heavier elements. So you have a star in the early universe that's creating these heavier elements inside the star, and then once the star runs out of fuel, it explodes, and those heavy elements get thrown out into the vicinity of the deceased star, so to speak. And then you get other stars and planets forming, partly from the remnants of that older star. And our sun is about 4 billion years old. So compared to the universe, which they reckon is about 13.5 billion years old, our sun is quite young, and our Earth is a similar age. So the heavier elements that we have in the Earth and the other planets almost certainly was produced inside the star that was born, lived and died before our sun was formed. And that's why we have these heavier elements inside us now. We are star stuff in that sense. Well, I mean, firstly, it might be true, but I believe in that. I have a problem with that every time I find a little bit more knowledge, God moves somewhere else. That's a little bit convenient. Isn't it more likely that there is no God in the first place? But of course then we also have to have questions about what we mean by God and so on. You can come at this in two different ways. First of all, I don't think science can explain everything. Most of our lives are nothing to do with science. When we get up in the morning, have our day, and the most important things that happen in our life are not really anything to do with science. They're to do with emotion and relationships with the people around us. Now, science can explain all of those things, I'm sure, what happens chemically in our brain when we're in love and stuff like that, but only scientifically. And that's quite different, I would say, to the actual experience of being in love or having a relationship with brothers and sisters and the people around us. So what seems to have happened, I would say, in the last few hundred years with the expansion of scientific knowledge, God has moved more into areas where nothing can be disproved, and it makes God the concept of God a much more it's very fluid. It's not non-solid. You can't grasp it. And now some people will say, well, yeah, that's what God is like. He's unknowable. He's esoteric. He's beyond. And for me, that's just too convenient. I think it's more likely there is no God, and people are uncomfortable with that concept. So they make the language complex so that they can continue to justify the existence of God and to believe in God. I could certainly see that one day human beings will live forever. Now that might be in our physical bodies, and if you look at especially recent history, we live much longer. Is there a limit to how long we can live? Can we live forever? I cannot see why not. If the medical knowledge is sufficiently advanced, yeah, why not? But there might be other ways that we can live forever. Some people say we do, in that we live forever through our genes. But that's not really what most people mean when they talk about heaven. They mean actually your ego in your body, you live forever. Now, if the method of living forever is not a physical one, in that we have a body that never ages, if it's not done that way, then there might be other ways we can live forever, like somehow downloading our brains into a computer or a hard drive. And then our body dies away, but the hard drive is still there and it can copy itself so that we always exist. Something like that. That might be possible. And maybe that's a kind of heaven. If you lived in a computer, you could create an environment where it was perfect. So maybe that can be a kind of heaven. But there is a philosophical question about whether that's really you. I mean, after all, your body has died and the information in your brain has passed on to a computer. Is that really you? Not really sure. So I'll leave that one to the philosophers. I would never go into a teleportation machine for that reason. They make another one of you and they kill the original. Yes, I'd be uncomfortable with that. But it's an odd concept, because human beings, the matter that we're made of is just from the food that we eat, and that gets replaced every 7 years or something like that. So really, in a way, the physical matter that we're made of is not the thing that we are. The self is more to do with patterns and ideas that exist mainly in our brain, or maybe in our brain and our body interacting with each other, and maybe with the environment as well. I mean, maybe that's what we are. But I certainly wouldn't want to get into anything that's magical or superstitious. I mean, I think I'm talking about purely physical processes. If you throw a stone onto a pond, you create ripples. If you look at the particles on the pond, they only rise up and down. They don't travel anywhere. But the information travels out as the ripples travel out from where the stone landed towards the edge of the pond. It's the information inside us that really makes us what we are, our experience, our knowledge, our ideas. And also, those are the ideas that we pass on to other generations. So that's also another way of living forever, kind of. Yeah, this is the idea of the matrix, isn't it? That in the matrix, of course, the human race has been captured, and they're actually, the physical bodies are stored, and the bodies are used to generate electricity for the machines to live on. And a program has been written so that in the brains of the people, they have a reality created, the matrix, where they feel as if they're living in the real universe. But I kind of think we're never going to know. That's one thing. What is the nature of reality? Is this a computer program, or is it real reality? And I'd also say that it kind of doesn't matter, because we only really have the interpretation of reality. That, to us, is what reality is. What we can see, touch, taste, smell, hear, and maybe some genetic stuff that we have in our genes from our parents. That's all we have. That is reality in that sense. So it just doesn't matter if that's real reality or a computer program. But to answer the question, will this happen? I have absolutely no doubt one day the human brain will be downloaded and stored in some way in a computer. When I was a child, heaven was like a fun fair, like Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and you'd go there and there'd just be an infinite number of rides, and every ride would be more and more exciting than the last one. Of course, I don't believe that now. That would be more like hell at my age. But I think that whatever idea of heaven I come up with, it's highly likely that, I'd get bored with it after a while. So it would need to be a changing universe. And I guess a universe in which I had some control. I'd like to explore, not just physically, space and time. I like to explore intellectually. So a challenging universe where I could continue to explore new things, that would be like heaven to me, I guess.